Welcome to episode 409 of the Barcelona podcast, brought to you by the Blue Wire Podcast Network. I'm Dan Hilton, and while it's been a while, I'm so excited to head into the World Cup break with the return of one-third of Siempre, Positivo, Sam Marsden. With everything happening in the last week, thanks so much for taking the time, Sam.
Hey Dan, thanks for inviting me on again, and apologies for the delay. It's been a while, and I need to hold my hands up. It's been 24 hours longer than it should have been as well, because we were supposed to record on Thursday, recording on Friday in the end because I completely forgot and messed up the time. So apologies, and hello.
Yeah, I mean, we're very forgiving of Siempre Positivo as long as you continue to bring listeners from your show onto our show because of these collaborations. I mean, that's really the whole point of the game. But I also have to say, in the Siempre Positivo power rankings, Rick, I think, has been on 3 times. This is your second appearance, and Tony is still at 1. So you're working your way towards Rick, if it is any competition.
Yeah. You managed to get Tony on once, then in the end, he's hard to pin down sometimes.
Yeah, I must have hit the right week, but I think we also scheduled like 2 months out. So I think that's usually how it works with Tony. But yeah. All right, so speaking of what you guys will be covering, or let's say having a little bit more of a break, depending on your coverage schedule, first things first for today's show is about the World Cup, and that is hitting them with the day's news before we get to Pique and Osasuna and all that stuff. The Spain squad was announced by Luis Enrique, and Barca will see Pedri, Gavi, Ansu Fati, Busquets, Ferran Torres, Eric Garcia, and Jordi Alba, all of those heading to the World Cup, which means no Alejandro Balde, but yes to Ansu Fati. Is that a surprise to you? Any of those names, any of those omissions?
On the Barca side of things, I don't think I'm really that surprised. I think with the 26-man squad, obviously in the past it's been 23, but with that extra 3, I think it gives you a little bit of room to not so much take a chance on Ansu because he's been fit this season, but obviously, he's not the Ansu that he was. I mean, obviously, it was very fleeting glimpses we've had of him even when he was sort of, 16, 17. So it's hard to say what he was and what he will be. But with that 26-man squad, I did kind of expect it. And I was thinking at first I wasn't 100% sure, but the more I thought about it, the more I thought Luis Enrique would do it as much as for this tournament, just as the reasons that you think, Ansu is a player who's going to be important for the national team moving forward, even if you don't see him as ahead of perhaps, even Nico Williams or Morato, Ferran Torres or whoever it may be, Asensio. He's a player that you're going to have around the squad, as you build this squad for the next 2, 4, 6, 8 years. So I think it's as important, as much looking to the future as it is for this World Cup to call up Ansu. And for that reason, I was not half expecting, but I thought he would be in the 26. And I was surprised in the end that Balde wasn't in there. I was convinced that he was not going to be in the squad just because his breakout has just come a little bit too late, probably. Hasn't quite had enough time. And I know Luis Enrique obviously picked Gavi after 6 games, but in that left-back position, Spain we can debate the merits of Jordi Alba in the form of his career, but in terms of Spain and international football, Jordi Alba and Jose Luis Gaya have been sort of nailed on for Luis Enrique for a while. And so, the option to therefore take Balde is to either make the big call to leave one of those guys out who've been, a big part of the squad. And Gaya's been in great form at Valencia this season. I mean, against Barca, he was really good the other weekend. It would have been a really big call to leave one of those 2 out to take Balde. And then the other option is to take Balde as the third left back. So I didn't think Balde would be in, but I was surprised in the end that he wasn't, because I spoke to, this is Luis Enrique, he keeps his cards close to his chest and keeps things quiet. But I spoke to different people, not even looking to run a story, just like speculating about, what do you think the squad will be? And there were people that were certain that Balde was going to be in there and that Sergio Ramos was also going to be recalled. And obviously neither of them were in there. My gut feeling was Balde would not be in there. No, but then I was kind of surprised because I was convinced by other people that maybe he would be.
Well, I mean, whenever you're doing that and saying, well, who's omitted, it's the same thing with the Olympics or any of these national teams, right? I always say, and that's the same thing, or we'll say like NBA All-Star stuff, right? Like whenever anyone feels slighted or feels like somebody was omitted, then I always say, who's the player that you take out? Like you always have to make sure you're swapping somebody out because, that player would probably deserve to be there, but who are you leaving? Balde is interesting because you're right. It's a like for like with Alba, but because I think Gaya is the starter, unequivocally the starter, it's 7 games. Maybe he'll start all 7, with the exception of maybe the third group stage game if Spain has already figured something out, but that's a really hard group. So there's this world where Gaya starts all 3, and Alba is the experienced backup. So you want to bring an experienced backup. And you said it, Luis Enrique and Alba, while it wasn't perfect when they were at Barcelona together, it's been a pretty good union for the Spanish national team, especially of late. And then, I think people are questioning that back line. And, you wanted to ask Sergio Ramos at that conversation. And I guess it's Guillamon who's surprising you, of the Valencian center back, defensive midfielder / center back. But his versatility, I think, is what Guillamon makes why he becomes the 24th, 25th, 26th name on that roster. And his versatility, I think, is what gets him there. That's what Luis Enrique has employed before. And then you are putting a lot on. You'd expect it's Pau Torres and Laporte, Emerick Laporte, with Eric Garcia pretty much backing them up. But then Azpilicueta can also play the center back, and he's at the right back with Carvajal. So, I mean, I actually think it's right back that you kind of raise questions for the Spanish national team. And, I mean, center back maybe, but, again, Eric Garcia is the third center back, which is what he, in theory, is for Barca, third or fourth center back. And then I think moving ahead to the forward, I think that's where the concern is, or the interesting concerns are, that Ansu has had struggle with form and has not scored the goals this season. And Yeremy Pino from Villarreal has really broken out and been a bit of a star. And same with Nico Williams. But they're also still teenagers as well. Or maybe Pino is I think 20 now, I think. And then, Nico Williams still 19. So you're talking about young players, 3 young players. And I think that's what Luis Enrique has also done. He said, all right, Alvaro Morata, be our guy, be our lead striker. Then between Asensio, who's also been really inconsistent and hot and cold this season, Olmo has been, again, hot and cold at RB Leipzig as well. It's not like he's been really lighting up the world this season, though he's had a few good Champions League matchups. And then Pablo Sarabia, who you'd say that his level is not the elite level, but he's really useful. He's a useful player. That's how I explain Sarabia, and he hopes that Ferran Torres can be useful. And so those are your forwards. And I wonder, when push comes to shoves, if this Spanish national team doesn't have a forward necessarily where you can put the weight of the world on their shoulders. And I think that's why he's going with young players who might be just blind to the fact that they're in the Copa Mundial, throw something against the wall, and maybe one of those players sticks. Like, it wouldn't surprise me if Pino ends this tournament with 3 goals, or even if Ansu ended this tournament with 3 goals, or Nico Williams, right? Like, one of those players can break out. And then we didn't talk about the midfield. I don't think we need to. The midfield is deep and the best part of the Spanish national team.
Yeah, the midfield is good. And the attack, it reminds me a little bit really of Euro 2020. Luis Enrique's obviously got a couple of guys in there that he likes. I mean, the other one would have been Oyarzabal, but obviously he's injured. Dani Olmo and Pablo Sarabia are 2 players that he often goes to and have often produced for him for Spain. I think what we see is what we see in the Euros. I think we see, if not loads of rotation, we see a little bit like how Barca managed that front 3, I guess, in terms of, we see players playing for an hour, and then we see, Nico Williams and Pino coming on for, the last half an hour of games to provide perhaps that impetus out wide in terms of pace or something different. And that will probably be Ansu's role as well. But like you say, it also depends on how the group games go, what sort of flexibility they have going into their last game and stuff. And yeah, I guess not the surprise so much, but it's just that there is no natural backup for Alvaro Morata. I know Luis Enrique says, Asensio, Ansu Fati, Ferran Torres, they can all play as sort of a number 9 to a degree. But I kind of expected or thought that I don't mind it. I don't hate the decision, but I think I expected that Borja Iglesias would go just as that option.
Yeah, but then again, you take out one of those young players. So I would say a little bit surprised too that there isn't more experience, but I think, again, Luis Enrique, we have seen with his selection before, he kind of goes for broke. He says, I go with the potential. I go with the ability for a player, with the high, no offense to Borja Iglesias, but the higher ceiling is one of these players like completely going nuts and breaking out and being as magnanimous as a young player can be. But speaking of players who were not called to the team, I don't think anyone really expected Gerard Pique. I think there were some rumors and there's some fun stuff happening about that. But obviously, Gerard Pique was not going to be named to the World Cup squad by Luis Enrique because, now we focus on Gerard Pique. And, I was going to say the whole rest of the show is going to be about Pique, but I have to say we're going to basically have to do a Pique segment, then an Osasuna segment, because Barca did have some other plans against Osasuna, and we do have to focus on that in a bit. So for Pique, I don't know really where you want to focus here. I think there are basically 3 big topics to discuss. And I guess one would be, how fun was it that he ended his Barca career the way he did, getting a red card at halftime, getting sent off before he could even hit the field after having that huge ovation at the Camp Nou that you were at, and all that fun stuff. Becoming Barca's most ever sent-off player, by the way, with 11 red cards, equaling the great Hristo Stoichkov. And in Stoichkov's defense, he did it in way less games. So Pique does not have that honor. So Stoichkov still has the honor of being the biggest curmudgeon for Barca in their history. But yeah, gets knocked off at halftime. Then we can talk about his big career. But then also the fact that, this is unsurprising as well, and you covered this, his interview with Ibai, the Twitch star, and that pivot into business immediately. He didn't even wait literally a week. He did not wait even 3 days before he pivoted, said, "Hey, I got a lot of stuff in the works, and here's the next thing." And to me, it's almost a little bit of exhaustion. Like I just wanted a little bit of a break from Peak. I just wanted to know that he sat down for a week and thought about his career and got all sentimental and all that, but he didn't. He spent 2 days preparing his next step. But as he also said in those comments in the interview, if not for Araujo and Kunde getting hurt, he would have retired earlier. So I think that actually hurts it a little bit and says, well, Inter Milan, he was already planning on being retired, and yet he still makes the mistakes he made. And I don't know, like that, it puts a bad taste in my mouth just a bit that he already had these plans to walk away. And yet he said, oh, you were forcing me to do this. And yet being forced to have a poor performance it's a rough one at the end of a really wonderful legacy.
Yeah, well, yeah, a lot to unpack there. I think first of all obviously, like you say, there were rumours about him being in the World Cup squad, and Luis Enrique did confirm that he was on that 55-man pre-list. If anything, as like a backup if there were injuries or whatnot. So it's probably a long way down there, but it's interesting in itself.
55 names, a lot of names. I think you might have been just on the bubble of 55 names. Like that's a lot.
If you think about it, you take 26, so you basically pick 2 squads. So he's in like the second squad, if you think about it like that, which is, I don't know. I guess it's just interesting in itself because obviously he'd retired. So I don't know if he'd had some sort of sounding out from Luis Enrique. Luis Enrique didn't explain whether he'd say, look, if we are short, would you be interested? You'd imagine maybe something would have gone on there. But yeah, no Gerard Pique at the World Cup. That would have been one way to go. It would have been quite Pique to go out that way, actually. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess just in terms of the business, I think this is obviously something that had been, because obviously this project that he's launched, I don't know too much about this King's Cup, which sort of combines real football with esports from what I can tell and different things. I haven't looked into it too much, but obviously with that launch being on Thursday night, like you say, just 2 days after his retirement, I think that was planned for that day anyway, because it obviously coincides with the start of the break that Barca have got now for the World Cup, and Pique had obviously promised Joan Laporta at the start of the season that he would take a side step and wouldn't be the face of anything for now and stuff. So he was obviously waiting for this break to launch that project, regardless of whether he was needed to play or not. And I don't know about you, but I was actually, the referee Gil Manzano's report, I presume most of your listeners would have seen what Pique supposedly said and whatnot, and his tirade of sort of abuse against the referee, a referee famous for adding Lewandowski now to his list of red cards, along with Messi, Neymar, Suarez, and a referee who, Barca fans, Barca famously think, screws them, as Pique did say, or damages them. I kind of, while not promoting the language using the thing, I kind of thought it would have been better for Pique to go out, like as if it was like pre-planned, him going out with that tirade of abuse to Gil Manzano. But obviously in the interview, he said that, it's not quite how the referee's report has explained it, which for me, I don't know about you, was a little bit disappointing. Like you said, it kind of felt like a great send-off, Pique going out with this. And as I spoke to Tony about as well earlier this week, this idea that it was almost like, Pique's first act, even though he said, the presidency and something which is on his mind right now, it definitely was playing to that tune, wasn't it? Look at me standing up for Barca, going after the referees, protecting the club, the first card of his, presidency campaign, whether it's in, 4 years or 10 years.
Yeah, I think him being the character that he is, I think that's what's also going to define his legacy a bit. As I said, I think there are those stars, those legends of the game that step away, and you only remember their playing career in this fond way. And yet you have players like Pique, and I think Dani Alves will be the exact same thing, where he's just up in your face. There's just news and business up in your face. And I wonder, Sam, if that's going to make us remember more the last few months or the last few years. Like you remember him just as he was, if that makes sense, as he transitions, as opposed to a player where if he had been gone for a little bit, I think, or let's say he steps away for 7-8 years and you don't really think of him. And then the things you think of are, as we kind of talk about, his greater legacy, you think of the Manita, things like that. So, like his highlights here, I just want to run through some of them, right? Scoring the 6th goal in the 6-2 El Clasico win at the Santiago Bernabeu in 2009. I want to remind people of that. Scoring the Champions League semifinal against Inter in 2010. And even though they lost, that was the one, if you remember watching that game, that was the one that gave them hope. It made them believe that they could come back. The most recent big moment he had was last March against Sevilla in the Copa del Rey semis, scoring the goal to send the game to extra time in that exciting match. And then, internationally, you said, why would he be picked for the World Cup? Well, take you back 12 years, a really gutsy game against Switzerland in that 1-0 loss to start the 2010 World Cup. Like, I think that was actually the game where even in that 2009 in the 6 trophies, he was seen, I think, as a bit of a pretty boy, right? As like the rich grandson of the vice president. And at that time, right around the 2010 World Cup, was a connection between he and Shakira. So he was seen, I think, as this, this pretty boy who was, and obviously the foil in every way to Puyol. But then he gets that gnarly cut above his right eye, and he plays the rest of the tournament looking like he's seen the worst of it in a boxing match. So obviously started all of those games to win the World Cup, and I think that really helped, along with the Barca stuff, to solidify just what his level was. And 2016 at the Euro, had the huge header against the Czech Republic in the opening game. Also, when I was thinking about that, making me realize too that I seem to remember only the opening games of these tournaments better than the second or third group stage games. So I think for the World Cup, maybe I did even skip that first round of games and just started the second and third, so I remember them better. But I think what the question that I'm now asking about his legacy, and we obviously go back to the biggest time when he was winning trophies, which is under the Pep Guardiola era, of course, when Barca they were sucking him up like a vacuum. How much credit do we give the individuals who are part of all that winning, especially for the center backs for an attacking side? Because I do see people it's fair for people to criticize, again, the contract situation with him, his personal life with Shakira, just the character that he is, potentially, and this is the huge one, potentially a falling out with Messi and how that's going to affect how people view him, sure. But just as a player, just as a legend of the club for what he did with the football when he was on the pitch, how high do you think we're going to put him? How high do you think we're ranking him? How important is his legacy going to be for this club as a player?
Yeah, there are two ways there are probably more than two ways if you go around the world, but obviously the ways, the prisms from which I see Gerard Pique and how his legacy is viewed at Barcelona. The first one is here in Barcelona, from people close to the club, from fans, from season ticket holders. And the second one is also from sort of perhaps more the UK than the US, but from the sort of English language, English sort of media point of view as well. And there's been a bit of disparity, I think, over this last week between how I don't think anyone thinks he was a bad player, but there is, Barca, I think he's probably viewed as, definitely within the top 5 at the club of all time. I've seen, Puyol and Mingeli mentioned as the only ones who are up there with him. Some people say perhaps Koeman and stuff and whatnot, obviously different eras, different roles, different lengths of times at the club. And yet in England, I've done a couple of radio shows and stuff where people have sort of been saying that, you can't even put him on the same level as sort of, like a Rio Ferdinand or Nemanja Vidic and that Man United back pairing and stuff. But when you look at what he's done and the consistency with what he's done it over, like you say, 14 years, this is his 15th season in the Barcelona first team. He was signed pretty much as, a backup at first and pretty much from the off, obviously not completely in that first season, but by the end of the first season, he was a regular. He's been a regular for those whole 14 seasons right up until the end of last season when he was playing through injury and was still, as he said himself, and I think it's hard to argue it, in that spell up until the 4-0 win at the Bernabeu when Barca went on a really good run, got themselves back in pretty much the running for the Champions League and eventually finished second. He was one of Barca's better performers, even playing injured. Obviously, the season tailed off with that injury and he's been phased out this season. So right up until then, really, he's been competing at a really high level. And like you say, that side of his game, I think, there's so many facets to Pique. And like you say, being a defender in a team that, even in his last game, probably a perfect example when you're playing Almeria at home, even though it was a 2-0 win, it could have been 5-0. A lot of the time you're a centre-back and you pass unnoticed. But there are games where he can mix it up, like you say, those international games, some of those big Champions League games where he's, not to the level that you would perhaps think of like a Puyol or a Vidic or a John Terry, because his reading of the game and the way he plays is different, but does mix it up. Luis Enrique today called him, a competitive animal. His desire to win, his competitiveness, his battling skills, probably, even within Barcelona, probably a slightly underrated side of his game. He's seen as like, the Barcelona style centre-back in some ways. His passing was good. There have been spells over the last 2 or 3 years where you notice when Barca had him and when Barca didn't have him just because of how much he facilitated them playing to their style. So yeah, I think, when you talk outside of Barcelona and within the world, it's very, very hard to form a list because there's been so many great centre-backs. I actually did, because of those debates I'd had on English radio where they were sort of saying that Pique wouldn't even be in the top 20 or 30 of all time. I actually asked Javi where he would put Pique. Although it's a difficult question to answer on the spot, I appreciate, because there are so many. And Javi's answer wasn't actually, it was a good answer. He named Beckenbauer and Baresi as sort of like the top 2, really. And then I think because he knows I'm obviously English, he said in England you have good ones as well. And he said Ferdinand and John Terry, and then he said but Pique's right up there with all of them, and he is. And I guess he's in that. I mean, he's in that clutch of of great defenders, because look at what he has won with Spain and Barcelona. 30 trophies with Barcelona over not just being in the team, but the consistency for 14 years, the desire to prove people wrong, the amount of times he's been written off. 3 Champions Leagues, a World Cup, a European Cup. Yeah, I think his legacy with Barcelona will be good. Outside of Barcelona, perhaps slightly mixed, I would say. There are some people that, like I say, wouldn't put him up there with some of the best, and perhaps have him in like that second tier. But even within sort of, when I think of Gerard Pique, and I think of Gerard Pique moments, like you say, in part it's because of his position within Barcelona. He's a defender. You think of Messi, you think of the goals, you think of, Xavi and Iniesta, you think of skills or assists or certain things they've done. It's harder to think of, like you say, when you think of Pique moments, you do think of goals, but they're not the things that should define him, really. The Sevilla goal that you mentioned, I remember, I've seen it quite a lot because of the celebration in the empty stadium in front of the camera. So that one's one that I've sort of seen a lot over the last week. Obviously, the defending comes down to defending. But also, I think there's another facet with Pique, is that when you think of Pique, you're inclined to think about all the things that he does off the pitch as well. And you think of all the moments or the comments or the tangles he's had, whether it was with the one with Arbeloa, you also think of. But also one for me, quite a personal moment for Pique, which always stays with me, was just his reaction and speaking to him in the mix zone after that game played against Las Palmas behind closed doors in 2017, after the day of the unilateral referendum here in Barcelona, when the game went ahead behind closed doors because of the police brutality and fears that perhaps, that sort of edge around the city that day would spill into the stadium or whatnot. And Pique's genuine, heartfelt, emotional comments in the mix zone after the game also stay with me as well, because it's obviously something that was very personal to him. I mean, even to this day, we still don't know whether he's pro independence or not. We just know that he's pro right to decide. But yeah, you could see how affected he was by that and how much it did mean to him, the club and Catalonia.
Yeah, he is Catalan, which again I think it's going to create, as you're saying, I think 2 different legacies, right? There's the fact that he is Catalan, the fact that he lives and dies by Barcelona, and that means something to the people in the city. And then when we're listening to other media, as you said, to the UK, because the minute you said John Terry and Rio Ferdinand, I don't know how many trophies they've won, but like Pique's won double the amount of trophies, or they've won or John Terry's won a third of the amount of trophies that Gerard Pique. And then that goes back to the question I even initially posed, was like, Pique has all those trophies, and I mean Dani Alves has 40 trophies. So how much credit do you give to the individuals for collecting those trophies they have, or do you just kind of again give more credit to Messi, who, if not for Messi, how many trophies does Pique have, right? Because that's the immediate response to that kind of question. As far as bringing up where he ranks for Barcelona, not to say I'm unwavering with my list here, but I have Puyol. I think there's a top shelf, and it's Puyol for Barcelona center back history, and then I think it's Koeman and Pique. And those, you can almost change those around. But I think for me, it's Koeman because of his scoring acumen at the time and the way he led that team. And then Pique, because again, Pique kind of waited until he didn't even become a captain until it was a bit, we'll say after the fact. And then I have the next level is Migueli and Juan Segarra from the 50s team. I mean, Segarra was just such an important captain in the club's history. And then again, Migueli is just the Iron Man, was there for so long. And then Alex Zanco is number 6. So that's my top 6, not even top 6, kind of in that order. And I'm pretty unwavering to that. But for Pique, yeah, it's interesting how English media is going to spin it. I also wonder too if the response from English media is because of the way that Barcelona in right now. I think there is certainly, as you and I talk about, a sense of entitlement that is kind of being thrown back in the face of culés from all the winning that was done in the last decade. And I think people kind of happy for that Schadenfreude financially for the club to kind of to throw that in their face. And Pique, of course, is a magnet, as you said, because he's such a personality. He's a magnet for the hate, for the vitriol, for the frustration. And I think, think back to the 8-2 Bayern Munich. I mean, I said it a few weeks ago that when I look into from all the pictures that I collected from those matches, and when I do the match reviews and things, half of the pictures I have from all those European nights, from Roma, from Liverpool, from Bayern Munich, it's Pique making a face. Like, that's what the camera captured every time. And he winds up being the image of Barcelona's best moments with the Manita and their worst moments in the last 10 years as well. And it just tells you how central of a figure he was. And then the final thing about Pique, I want you to put your crystal ball out and go like 10 years in the future with his relationship with Messi, which again is possibly more strained than we even know. 10 years from now, do you think that there is no more information ever to have come out on their relationship, on how they view each other? And they're both involved in the club in some capacity. Messi obviously will be involved in some kind of obviously ambassador, famous person role as connection to the club. And then Pique obviously somewhere involved in the board or some administrative role you'd expect. So do you think 10 years down the road they are coexisting? Or do you think that there is almost a reckoning for PR relations, PR for those two kind of being in separate camps in 7, 8, 10 years from now?
It's a difficult question. Don't like to comment on it too much because a lot of obviously what we have is secondhand information.
Yeah.
Sometimes lots of times from reliable people or that has come out at a time when it would make sense for it to be good information. But I still think that I think we'll see a future where they can coexist. I think, these are two guys that have known each other since since Messi came to Barcelona when he was 12, 13. They came through the academy together. Pique obviously left and came back, but then had so much success in the first team together. I think that they can, if there was any sort of friction created from Lionel Messi's departure, it's obviously not been enough to bubble to the surface beyond the reports that we've had, sometimes from reliable people, about how, Pique perhaps not orchestrated Messi's exit, but fed into this idea that, look, life goes on without Leo, that thing that annoyed Leo. I guess the closest thing we've had is, I think Messi maybe in one interview suggested there were some people at the club who he felt, or players or teammates who he suggested he felt could have done more or didn't do enough, kind of thing, when he was leaving. But no, I think that they can move on. These things happen in football a lot. They're obviously both huge figures in the club. A lot may even depend on, how Messi's career ends now. I think if Messi's career ends with a World Cup and a Champions League with Paris Saint-Germain, perhaps he won't look so badly back at his departure from Barcelona and be able to overlook it a little bit more. But, the Barca's future has to coincide with those two, really. I can't see it becoming, a split where you have to pick sort of Pique or Messi. And obviously they both have very different ideas for how they will be involved in football or with Barcelona once they have retired. Pique obviously in a more sort of presidential. Messi's most recent comment suggests he'd like to be some sort of sporting director or something like that. Whether we would see them working under together, I guess, is a different question altogether and would depend on timing as much as anything else. That could be a bit of a power struggle because I don't know what sort of President Pique would be like, whether he'd be able to just take his hands off and leave all the work to the sporting directors and whatnot, or if he'd want to be involved in that sort of. But that's another question for years down the line. I think they will be able to overcome any problems. I hope so.
Yeah, I mean, I get the sense that as a president, I think I don't remember if it was a trusted source or not, but I saw that Pique would want, or at least want to kind of take the club in a direction of like how a Bayern Munich is, where so many of the directors, so many of the people in the suits are former footballers or are people that have always been connected to the club or even front-facing figures. And Pique would trust them a little bit more in that fashion. So that would make you question as to what role Messi would have. Last little addendum on Pique is how I want people to kind of remember him too, is even though he did so much of his winning and he really became famous at 23 years old when under Pep Guardiola in the World Cup, he was 23, 24. He was a young player when he, we'll say, maybe reached his peak as far as winning, as far as being seen as this fantastic player. But he also, as you kind of mentioned last season, he developed. And that's kind of what's incredible about his legacy, that Barcelona, again, were in theory at their best when he was an inexperienced player at his worst, right? When Puyol was his big brother or his dad or whatever you could say. So at his least and most inexperienced is when he did his greatest winning. I mean, he did only play 12 matches for Manchester United and did a season for Real Zaragoza where he was a regular starter by the end and started as a rotation piece, even at Real Zaragoza. Then the next year he comes to Barca for 5 million euros, as you said, to be signed for a backup. He developed, he took that huge step forward that first season. But then I think he even aged like a fine wine. He did get better and better as time went on. And again, don't remember the last few months. It's kind of like the Shaquille O'Neal thing. Maybe it's a thing about big men. but don't remember the last few moments. Like, remember even the time 3-4 years ago or even 2 years ago, when you could argue that, I mean, his prime lasted till he was like 34 years old. Like, that's a long time, from 23 to 34, 11 years to, in theory, be on top of your game. Again, I think what was interesting, even though he developed, he also had those inconsistent moments where you can name 2 or 3 seasons in the middle where you're like, was his head on straight? And I think that's what was so infuriating about Pique, because very much like Alba, nothing was ever physical. Nothing was ever about their skill or their abilities. It was all about what was happening between the ears. Like, if they were unfocused or was there something else going on behind the scenes that kept their attention, that seemed to be why their form was failing, which I think is a transition, Sam, in talking about Osasuna, because Barcelona's grit and their desire and their fight has certainly been under question for now half a decade. Like, how much do Barcelona have in them to come back when they get punched in the mouth? Their resiliency, the ability to deal with adversity has certainly been hotly criticized for a long, long time for Barcelona now. But that win against Osasuna was historic. It was a monumental comeback victory to go down by a goal and down by 10 men. Just for historical context, I mentioned when Barcelona were down by a goal and losing at halftime and outnumbered at halftime, having conceded a red, they achieved 2 draws in the past, back in 1970 at Vicente Calderon, and then 3-3 in Vallecas in 1992. Those were the 2 times. This is the first time ever that Barcelona were down to 10 men and down a goal and came back to win in the second half. First time ever. And I think that does go a long way into saying something about Xavi. I mean, I think that's where we begin this, to talk about Xavi, the belief that the team has in him as a manager. It's whether the club believes in him or not, I think is almost irrelevant, because, if you're leading La Liga, I mean, unless your name is Ernesto Valverde and you fail in the Champions League again, you're not going to see yourself kicked out of the club. But for Xavi, he is a manager who takes Barcelona into first place into this World Cup break, and he did it in, again, historic fashion by having his club and his team rally from being down in a position they'd never come back from. And I think it's a really, really important win. And I don't want to understate the victory either.
Yeah, well, Barcelona, I'm not breaking any news here, but it's always so difficult to judge Barcelona, because any other club that would be top of the league with, that Barcelona's record this season, 1-11, drawn 1, lost 1, there wouldn't, I know we have, even just ignoring the Champions League for now, there wouldn't be even any debate, because even in that situation in La Liga, there has been some debate about whether Barca are truly sort of progressing in terms of their style or how they're playing. And there aren't many clubs that would, the way Barcelona are playing, the results they're getting, that would complain, but that's always going to be the case at Barcelona. Xavi knows that, that, everyone knows that, and it's the way it has to be. So yeah, I'm pro Xavi. Obviously, he needs loads more time. I guess the progress, in terms of aesthetically, has perhaps not been. I mean, the job was massive though, so maybe the expectations were unfair. Has not been always as obvious to see in terms of performances, if not results. But yeah, I think there have been a couple of huge results, which were hugely important for 2 reasons. Obviously, the fact that they were wins at Valencia, the Lewandowski goal, and then the comeback game against Osasuna, like you say. And I think they're important because Barca going into the World Cup break, Barcelona is a club that is capable of shooting itself in their foot from, any sort of slight problem or polemic, or if they'd have even just drawn or lost to Osasuna, then these next 6 weeks would have been all sorts of debates about, Xavi or certain players or whatnot. So I think it was important in terms of having that stability during this 6 weeks break, and obviously important as well in terms of, being top, going back above Madrid, keeping a lead during the break, and coming from behind. Like you say, the character, I mean, there's been a lot of, I don't know if criticism, and this isn't just of Barcelona, the in vogue at the moment is, moan about teams celebrating wins or, against teams that are perceived to be smaller or that are not for trophies. But this, if you look at the celebrations from the win over Osasuna, and you look at who the players are who are leading it, it's the guys like Balde, Gavi, the young guys, really, some of the older guys are slightly in the background. These are guys that haven't won everything. People go, Barcelona, these are guys that haven't won anything. They've been part of the Barca's first team, for 1, 2, 3 years in some cases, and all they've known is, setbacks, defeats, getting knocked out of the Champions League. So these are big results, and they're sort of creating sort of their own story. Really, it's a new story for them. They're not part of the trebles in 2015, 2009. So let them celebrate. And I think those results are important as well in that sense of like, look, we can do things, we can do certain things. But yeah, I mean, also important to remember that, obviously the Osasuna game. I mean, Osasuna have been great this season.
Yeah.
They were perhaps better. I mean, this is often the case. I often find it as a Burnley fan. I often prefer to play against the team when they have 11 men than 10 men, especially when they're the bigger team. It can sometimes come a little bit awkward. And then you sort of sense that with Osasuna in the second half, especially with that early goal from Pedri. Osasuna were almost sort of conflicted between what do we do here? We've got the impetus because we've got the extra man, but if we push, if we leave spaces, could we get punished? And then they had that. Obviously, they wouldn't have so much of the fear against 11 men because they're more of an underdog. Whereas with that more equal thing, I was not disappointed with Osasuna, but I just thought you could see the conflict that they had between how to play in the second half. So yeah, you need to sort of put each, take things just slowly. I mean, the analysis is always so immediate. Barca lose to Bayern bad, Barca come back and beat Osasuna good, Barca only beat Osasuna, or it's only Osasuna, different things. It needs to be gradual, and we've seen that in the league since Xavi came in. We've seen that in the league. We now need to see that in Europe. And, in that sense, Manchester United is a great draw in the Europa League because, Manchester United, not one of the top teams in England at the moment, but making progress under Erik ten Hag. Will be a big game. It will be a tough game in the Europa League. So it gives them a chance to sort of grow with these young players. When you see, regardless of the moment Manchester United are in, going to Old Trafford for the second leg, obviously, that's huge in terms of experience for, Gavi, Balde, Eric Garcia, whoever's playing at the time, Pedri still, Ferran Torres, Ansu Fati if he's playing. You just need to see it over time. I don't think the demand needs to be to win the league necessarily this season. But yeah, they've shown in the league that they can compete now. They need to do it in Europe, and obviously they also need to sort of. I don't think that it's not that they're playing badly, but obviously the demands at Barca are that they can play better.
Yeah, so three of my other main headlines or things to focus on coming out of that Osasuna match is one, Lewandowski by picking up those 2 yellows and then by making the gesture he did while coming off the field. Looks like he's going to be suspended for the 3 or 4 matches coming back from the break, which is, again, not great to have Lewandowski because how important his goals have been in the Liga. He is the leading scorer in Spain for a reason. And I think to that end, it's really telling, not even telling, but I think it's important for the narrative, right? Important for our game match reviews and recaps that Rafinha was the one who scored the goal. The same guy that less than 24 hours earlier had that interview released when he said, I want to score more goals. I need to score more goals. And he has I think what could be I know now he has a month off, but let's say he goes and succeeds with Brazil at the World Cup. We can see Rafinha potentially turning the corner using that goal against Osasuna as a springboard to be an influential player at the World Cup, and then coming back to Barcelona without Lewandowski, and now you're kind of coming back from the international break without him, saying Ferran Torres, Rafinha, Dembele, Ansu, figure some things out. We need to win in the Liga, so you've got 3 or 4 matches where the pressure is on you, the responsibility is on you. So those two things working in tandem, because again, you talked about celebrations, like Rafinha. There was a weight lifted. He needed to score. And so him scoring that, I think, not to say defends the celebrations against Osasuna, but as you said, I mean, Osasuna has been good this season. I think the club and I think the players are much more aware of respecting their opponent than I think even the fans. I think there are times when Barcelona might overlook an opponent, and I think when that may be, right? I mean, I think Real Madrid has a habit of doing it too. They did it a little bit against Cadiz last night, and yet they wind up getting through the way they need to against Cadiz, the way they're supposed to. But it's not easy. And these clubs, even at the bottom in the Liga, make sure it's not easy, even though the Liga as a whole in quality may have taken a step down. I think that is, to me, in the first half of this season, or the first part of the Liga, become kind of the narrative. Barcelona 11 of 14 clean sheets, but they've suffered. The Liga teams have made them suffer. And I think that says what you need to say, that there are 2 teams that are above everybody else. It's Real Madrid and it's Barcelona, way above everybody else. They are getting the results, but again, the rest of the Liga is making them go through the worst of it. And I think that's part of the story. And then the last little thing I want to throw your way, I know I'm throwing a lot at you here, is it's interesting to me, and I talked with Barcelev, a Twitter personality, earlier in the week, about Frankie de Jong and Sergio Busquets. And the question we posed was, when was the last time Barcelona lost a match where Frankie de Jong played well? And Osasuna was the exact same thing. Frankie de Jong played well, Barcelona won. And the same cannot be said in inverse about Sergio Busquets. That was maybe the worst. I don't know about you, but that may have been the worst, at least 20 minutes to start that game that I've seen of Sergio Busquets arguably ever. I mean, there were a few times in the last 5-6 years where he's had a rough start, but you could say that many of his teammates also struggled. This was an independent thing where you could say Barcelona were not totally up to it, but Busquets was an anchor, almost dragging them down in a way in that first half. The mistakes he was making, the first goal. I mean, he creates the foul. Then he's the one who mano a mano. You can argue that Alonso got knocked down and he could have blocked it. But I mean, if Busquets doesn't get beat in a one-on-one battle at the back post, we're not even arguing about Alonso being fouled at all. And Busquets just, again, 1v1, dead to it. So I have the sense, not to answer for you, but I have the sense that this rotation and the reliance on Busquets is not going to change in the second half of the season. I think Busquets is still going to be relied on heavily. I think he's going to arguably be the regular starter. I think we see a combination of Pedri, De Jong, Busquets, or Pedri, Gavi, Busquets. I think you still see that combination more than you see the Pedri, Gavi, De Jong that won the 4-0 over Villarreal, which we have not seen since. I just think Busquets is the step back that I think that people think that Xavi is going to have for Busquets. I just don't think it's going to come this season. But there's also a world, because of these results, where Busquets is gone, as opposed to signing a 1-year cheap renewal. There, I think, because of these performances, that says where he's going to be next season, and that's likely not at Barcelona. It's at wherever it may be, Inter Miami, or wherever it happens to be.
I think the same as you. I expect Busquets to leave for free when his contract expires in the summer, save a big change of opinion. But it's interesting to hear Xavi and especially Luis Enrique, I don't know if you heard, speak about Busquets today. So it was obviously put to him this idea. I mean, not an outlandish idea, Busquets going into the World Cup at 34, that this would be his last World Cup. And Luis Enrique was like, no, not at all. In fact, I would like to convince him to play another World Cup. I mean, I can't imagine Luis Enrique is still the Spain manager in 4 years, but that's what he was saying. And he was explaining that if we play the way we want to play, then there's no better player for Spain than Barcelona. That being that Spain in this case, on the front foot, pretty much playing in the opponent's half, not giving up space. I think the problem is that, we saw against Osasuna, Barcelona can't guarantee that they're going to play that way. And when they're not able to play that way, and not able to have things all their own way, then obviously it becomes a problem having Busquets in terms of, like you say, that first 20 minutes against Osasuna was, perhaps an exaggeration in the scheme of where Busquets is, but it was really, really, really poor. You gave the ball away for the corner. It wasn't the corner, but the corner that led to the goal. Lost David Garcia for the goal. I think about 3 minutes later, gave the ball away again, and Chimi Avila hit the side net, and it was really bad. But I don't think that we're going to see Xavi phasing him out in the second half of the season. I think that Villarreal game was just a rest because it came at a time when there was match, and I think everyone was getting a rest. I've been quite interested, really, that I think, was it 2 or 3 games now that he's left Gavi on the bench? Could just be a World Cup thing. It could have been related to the knock he picked up in. I can't remember which game it was. Athletic Bilbao when he went off. Could have been related to any of those things, but it seemed quite surprising. Like you say, De Jong completely deserves. Anyone that's read or listened to me knows that. It's hard to work out because Frenkie De Jong as a pivot is somewhere Frenkie obviously thinks he can play. But, I think it was Erik ten Hag when he was at Ajax says that, Frenkie's not a single pivot. You need to play him as, in a double or in another sort of role. But I just think we've got to the point where Barca should play that midfield. De Jong, Gavi, Pedri, because you need to play it to give it continuity and to try it. It seems that De Jong is not going to be Busquets' replacement. They will sign, another pivot, and they will keep either rotating Pedri, Gavi, and De Jong, or one day maybe sell De Jong. Definitely not in January, I would say. But who knows what will happen next summer after last summer. But I would, between now and the end of the season, play De Jong. They give that continuity because I always think it's hard, and not just on De Jong in this sense because he plays a lot of games, but when you have players that don't play and then you sort of make 11 changes and it's like they all come in and it's a whole new team, they're not played together, they're not used to the mechanisms, the passing and little things. You need a run of 4 or 5, 6 games to really judge a team or a player. Like when you play, and Ferran Torres did well, for example, against Victoria Pilsen, but when you just, when you were drip feeding Torres in and it's just like we're giving one game here and then, he was no good, we're dropping. I don't think it's good for the player or for trying in that position, really. So I think just at some point there needs to be an extended run, in my opinion. It goes against, I think, what Xavi thinks of playing Frenkie as the pivot with with Gavi and Pedri. I liked it against Villarreal. I would like to see it more often. I understand Frenkie de Jong is a very different player to Busquets. He can do things that Busquets can't, but also he can't do things that Busquets can. But I don't know if there is a player like Busquets. Busquets is a very unique player, and he's always been a very Marmite player as well. A lot of people don't see what he's good at. A lot of people have thought in the past outside of Barcelona that he's overrated or whatnot. Obviously, for me, he at his peak during his like Pique as well. For 14 years, 15 years, he's been at the very top of the game. But we are starting to see age catch up with him now, certain decision making, certain things. So I would be looking to phase him out and play De Jong more, even though he's still good on his best. Yeah, it's a difficult question. But no, basically just comes back to your answer. I don't think we're going to see that. No.
Well, I think somebody, I don't remember who said it, so I unfortunately can't credit them, but somebody said that De Jong makes the difficult passes look easy and makes the easy passes look difficult. And Busquets is the opposite, that Busquets makes the easy passes, he makes the easy passes look easy, and he also makes the difficult passes look easy. But when he doesn't, that's really when you see the issues because of the other holes in his game that have either eroded now through age or what have you. So, all right, Sam, I think that'll wrap it up. You've got World Cup preparations to make and other business to attend to and continue to be a reporter in the city on the ground. I'm just going to edit a podcast here. So I guess the last thing, as always, I think most of my listeners at this point have an idea about Siempre Positivo. I would hope to say that there's quite a bit of overlap. So I always tell people, just make about 4 hours a week for all of your content, whether it's the Barcelona podcast and Siempre Positivo with Rick and Tony. But anything else as far to plug? Or, obviously you're not going to give away big stories or things you're working on, but where can people continue to find everything that you're doing?
No, nothing majorly to plug. No, like you say, the podcast with Rick and Tony, Siempre Positivo, and also like you say, there's so much drama and stuff going on at Barcelona, especially we're gonna have a little bit of a break now, maybe with the World Cup in general, with the games, with the soap opera off the pitch. There's enough room for there's enough room.
It's transfer rumor season, Sam. Yeah, that.
Probably enough room for about 10 Barcelona podcasts in your week, but definitely at least 2. But yeah, in the meantime, just on Twitter, Samuel Marsden, if you want to interact, and write in on ESPN.
Yep, that'll be in the show notes below. Again, you can follow him, Siempre Positivo, us, Twitter and Instagram at the Barcelona Pod as well, Facebook, Patreon, YouTube. You know where to find us, merch store as well. So thanks so much for listening to the show. Until next time, we'll talk to you soon and force the Barca.